The first time I saw the tiny glint on the side of my driveway, I thought it was just morning dew catching the sun. But when I leaned closer, I realized it wasn't dew, it was glass. A small circular lens hidden behind the hollow casing of what looked like a decorative screw on my fence post, pointed directly at my front door like a silent eye that never blinked. And my stomach turned because the only person who had been complaining about watching what goes on around here was my neighbor Karen, the self-appointed queen of our cul-de-sac, who thought every inch of the neighborhood fell under her personal surveillance jurisdiction, even though our street wasn't even part of an HOA. For months, she'd been pestering me about my new security lights being too bright, my truck being too loud, and my family's weekend bonfire not conforming to community aesthetics. But this was something else entirely. I could feel the blood rush in my ears as I crouched and gently pried the screw loose, finding a wire running beneath the soil straight toward her side of the property. And suddenly all those strange things started clicking together. The way she always seemed to know when I was home. The way she'd wave and say, "Sleep well," whenever I turned in for the night. And how she mentioned my visiting brother's license plate number offhand like she'd memorized it. I went inside shaking, my wife barely believing me until I laid the screw on the table and showed her the micro-camera lens. "That witch actually put a camera on our land," she whispered, horrified. I spent the next hour tracing where the wire went. It tunneled right under the shared fence, leading toward her garage. That was the point I decided enough was enough. I called the sheriff's office, half expecting them to tell me it was a civil matter, but when I mentioned the words, "hidden camera pointed at private residence," the dispatcher's tone changed completely. Within the hour, a deputy and the sheriff himself pulled up. I showed them the lens, the wire, and where it ran beneath the soil. They didn't even wait. They started digging near the fence line, and soon enough that same wire surfaced again near Karen's property edge. The sheriff walked to her front door, and I could hear Karen's shrill voice even from where I stood. "This is harassment! He's making up stories!" But when they asked to inspect her garage due to probable cause, she froze. You could tell by her face that she knew she was caught. Inside, they found what looked like a rat's nest of wires, monitors, and recording equipment, all connected to that same cable running from my driveway. The sheriff stepped back out with a grim face. "You're going to want to see this," he told me, leading me inside her open garage. There were multiple screens, one for my driveway, another for my porch, even a camera feed of my backyard from some hidden angle. "How long has she been doing this?" I whispered. The sheriff didn't answer right away. Instead, he called for backup and began unplugging everything. Karen was yelling, threatening to sue, demanding her lawyer, but it was useless. Her system was clearly wired to capture every move my family made. What chilled me most wasn't just the invasion, it was the timestamps on the recordings. She'd been filming for over 3 months, with folders named by date, and each video labeled by time of day. 6 a.m. entry, 8 p.m. truck arrival, 10:32 p.m. light off. She'd been cataloging our daily life like a predator. My wife stood frozen when she saw our kids playing in one of the recordings, zoomed in from the corner of the fence. "She filmed our children," she said, her voice breaking, and that's when the sheriff lost his composure. "Ma'am, you're under arrest," he said flatly, and Karen's shriek echoed through the entire street. Neighbors began peeking out their windows, phones ready, watching as she was cuffed and led into the cruiser still protesting, "I was just protecting the neighborhood." As they drove her away, the sheriff promised to run the footage for any evidence of distribution, warning that this could cross into federal territory if she'd uploaded any of it online. That night, our driveway felt different, too exposed, too violated. I couldn't even take out the trash without scanning the corners of every fence post. It was like discovering that your own home wasn't truly yours anymore. A week later, the sheriff returned with an update. Her garage had more than just cameras. It had audio mics, transmitters, and even a signal jammer that could disrupt Wi-Fi signals in nearby houses, which explained why my cameras often went offline at random times. The county IT techs found out she'd been storing all the footage on a hard drive labeled Neighborhood Watch Archives, but when they opened it, there were only videos of my family, no other neighbors, no community patrols, just us. The obsession was focused. I didn't know what scared me more, that she was watching or that she might have been planning something. Karen's husband had left her a year earlier, and since then she'd turned her house into a bunker of paranoia, installing motion lights and fake CCTV signs everywhere. But this time she crossed the line into felony territory, wiretapping, illegal surveillance, and trespassing. The sheriff assured me charges were being filed, but something about his tone told me this wasn't the end. And he was right. 2 nights after her arrest, someone broke into her property. We woke up to flashing lights again as patrol cars flooded the cul-de-sac. The sheriff called me outside, said Karen's garage had been ransacked. The hard drives were gone, the wiring ripped apart. No one could figure out who did it, but whoever it was knew exactly what to take. A theory spread that maybe Karen had an accomplice, someone who helped her set up the cameras and came to clean up afterward. My wife didn't sleep for days. I reinforced every corner of the fence, added motion sensors, and even installed my own cameras, real ones, legally mounted. But one morning, while reviewing my new system, I noticed something that froze my blood. A figure in dark clothing was standing near my fence at 2 a.m., holding something small and metallic, exactly at the same spot where the old camera had been. The figure wasn't Karen. She was still in county jail. It was a tall man with a hood pulled tight. The next day, I showed the footage to the sheriff. He frowned. "That's not one of ours," he said. "We'll send patrol cars tonight." When night came, we stayed inside with lights off, pretending to sleep. Around 2:30 a.m., I saw movement again through the curtain. Someone was crouching by the fence. I grabbed my flashlight and ran out, yelling, "Hey!" The person bolted, but not before dropping something shiny on the gravel. It was another screw lens, identical to the first. I stared at it under the porch light, realizing this wasn't just Karen anymore. Whoever was behind this wanted to keep watching, maybe to find out what the police knew. The sheriff came again in the morning, took the evidence, and expanded the investigation. When they reviewed Karen's phone records, they found text messages to an unknown number about Phase 2 and installation complete. That's when it got really dark. The sheriff's tech team traced that number back to a local private security contractor, someone with access to professional surveillance gear. Turns out, Karen had hired him months ago to monitor neighborhood safety, but she'd only ever directed his equipment toward one house, mine. And when the payments stopped after her arrest, he probably came back to recover his hardware. The county prosecutor added conspiracy charges, and suddenly, this simple neighborhood feud turned into a criminal case involving privacy invasion, data theft, and illegal surveillance operations. News crews started showing up on our street. Reporters wanted interviews, camera trucks parked near the mailbox, and Karen's house was taped off for evidence collection. I tried to keep my family out of it, but one evening, while walking to get the mail, I found an envelope in my box with no return address. Inside was a single printed frame from one of the surveillance videos, my wife sitting on the porch reading, time-stamped 3 months before. On the back, in neat handwriting, were the words, "You shouldn't have called the sheriff." I called the station immediately, and they sent a unit to sweep our property again. The deputy told me whoever sent that note likely had backup copies of the footage and was trying to intimidate us. They placed us under nightly patrol for 2 weeks, but the damage was already done. We couldn't relax, couldn't sit outside without feeling watched. I installed floodlights that could turn night into day, but every time I looked at the fence, I saw that first glint again. The sheriff eventually caught the man, one of Karen's hired contractors, arrested while trying to sell off camera gear to another homeowner. Under questioning, he admitted Karen had been obsessed with me ever since I moved in, convinced I was up to something illegal because I didn't attend her community meetings or sign her phony HOA petitions. She'd paid him to install cameras, telling him she had local authority approval. But the recordings he turned over were worse than I expected. Hours of personal footage, audio conversations captured from our porch, even video from inside my garage when the door was open. "You're lucky we got this when we did," the sheriff told me quietly. She had plans to expand the system. I didn't ask what that meant. By the time her trial began, the story had gone viral, and Karen stood in court with her trademark smugness gone, replaced by a trembling woman who looked like she'd been living in her own nightmare. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts, but the judge wasn't lenient, 5 years with mandatory psychiatric evaluation. Yet even as the verdict was read, she stared at me from across the courtroom and mouthed something I'll never forget. "It's not over." A week later, when I came home from work, my wife met me at the door, pale and shaking. She'd gotten an alert from our new camera system. Someone had triggered the motion sensor again, same corner of the fence. When we checked the feed, it wasn't a person this time. It was a small drone hovering silently, with a tiny camera on its front, pointing straight at the house. And in that chilling second, I realized Karen didn't need to be home to keep watching. The drone hovered there for barely 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity, the faint hum vibrating in my chest as it turned slightly, scanning the yard with a slow, deliberate motion, as if it knew exactly where to look. And when the floodlights kicked on, it shot upward like a startled insect, vanishing into the night sky, leaving only the echo of its propellers fading toward the woods behind our neighborhood. I ran outside, my flashlight beam chasing nothing but air, while my wife called the sheriff again, and within minutes 2 patrol cars arrived, their spotlights sweeping the treetops. The deputies confirmed they'd seen drones used in stalking cases before, but this one seemed to know our property boundaries too well. It didn't cross into other yards, didn't trigger other sensors, just hovered right over the same stretch of fence Karen had obsessed over. The sheriff arrived half an hour later, jaw tight, frustration in his eyes. "We'll contact the FAA and trace drone frequencies," he said, but we both knew that could take weeks. I asked him straight, could this still be her? He hesitated, then admitted the county lockup had released Karen 2 days earlier on a technicality, something about overcrowding and a pending transfer. My throat went dry. "So she's out?" He nodded. "She's supposed to stay at a monitored halfway residence, but she hasn't checked in." The silence that followed was heavier than the night itself. The sheriff left an unmarked cruiser near our driveway as protection, but I knew in my gut this wasn't over. The next morning, we found footprints near the side of the fence, small, narrow ones, fresh in the mud, leading toward the old oak that bordered our properties. It was like she'd been standing there just watching. My wife wanted to leave town, go to her sister's, but I refused to be driven out of my own home. I installed additional motion sensors and a high-range camera system capable of recording thermal signatures, the kind used in wildlife research. That night, around 1:47 a.m., the alarms went off again. I checked the live feed. There was movement near the garage, a faint heat signature hiding behind the trash bins. I grabbed my flashlight and my phone, calling the sheriff as I stepped outside, the beam slicing through the mist. The shape darted out, sprinting toward the woods, and I caught a glimpse of something metallic in their hand, another drone controller. The sheriff's deputies arrived seconds later, chasing the figure into the trees, but they came back empty-handed, except for what they'd found near the fence. Another camera, half buried in soil, its lens cracked but still warm from operation. This one wasn't a screw lens. It was a newer model, wireless, battery-operated with range extenders. Whoever planted it was updating their setup. My wife broke down that night, saying she couldn't take living under invisible eyes anymore. "It's like she's haunting us," she whispered, "even when she's not here." I didn't know how to reassure her because I felt the same way. The sheriff got a search warrant for Karen's last known address, a rundown motel outside county lines, and they found drone manuals, SD cards, and a list of coordinates that matched our home's GPS location. But the strangest thing was what else they found. Photos of our house printed out, annotated with red pen markings, arrows, and notes like blind spots, entry points, and test angles. It looked like surveillance prep straight out of a military manual. The sheriff called me in to see the evidence myself. "We're escalating this," he said. "This isn't just harassment anymore. It's stalking, targeted and strategic." Karen's court-appointed psychiatrist claimed she had delusional disorder, paranoid subtype, and believed she was protecting the community from invisible threats, but the sheriff didn't buy that excuse. He suspected she was still working with someone. And sure enough, 2 days later, another drone appeared, this one bigger, heavier, with a thermal camera attached. It flew higher this time, out of sight range, but I could hear its buzz. I managed to snap a photo before it zipped away. And when the sheriff's tech team analyzed it, they found it was a professional-grade model registered under a shell company called Neighborhood Insight Security, the same company tied to the contractor Karen had hired months ago. The owner, a man named Douglas Reeves, had vanished after Karen's arrest, shutting down his office and disappearing with all client data. Now it seemed he'd picked up right where she left off. The sheriff warned me to stay alert, suggesting we file for a restraining order even though we didn't know exactly who to file it against. That week, my truck tires were slashed twice, my mailbox torn open, and the same taunting words appeared again. Still watching. Spray painted on the back fence in faint silver paint. I installed floodlights that never turned off, but that only made me feel like I was living in a stage show, constantly illuminated for whoever was out there watching. One evening, as I was reviewing the new recordings, something odd appeared. A faint figure inside the reflection of our living room window, not outside, but visible from the interior camera. My breath caught. I rewound the clip and saw it again. A reflection of a woman standing just outside the glass, motionless. The timestamp, 3:13 a.m. My wife swore she hadn't heard a thing. When the sheriff reviewed the footage, he confirmed what I already knew. "That's her," he said grimly. "Karen." But how had she gotten so close without tripping any sensors? The answer came the next day when I found one of my motion detectors dismantled, wires neatly cut. Whoever did it knew exactly how to avoid detection. The sheriff doubled patrols, but each time they came by, the watchers vanished, like ghosts. The only clue left behind was a faint humming at night, sometimes distant, sometimes right over the roof. The sheriff brought in a state cyber forensics unit to check our Wi-Fi, and they discovered something terrifying. Someone had connected remotely into our home network through our own security system. The signal traced back to an unregistered hotspot that had pinged near Karen's old property line multiple times over the last week. In other words, she, or someone working for her, was hijacking our feed and watching our own camera footage live. I wanted to tear the whole system out, but the investigators told me to leave it running. They needed bait. That night, they set up a silent perimeter and hid unmarked cars nearby. Around 2 a.m., the signal appeared again. This time, the sheriff's team tracked it in real time to a van parked behind the old oak tree. They moved in fast, floodlights snapping on, guns drawn, but instead of Karen or Douglas Reeves, they found a teenage boy sitting inside with headphones, surrounded by monitors streaming my driveway feed. He looked terrified, barely 17, and confessed immediately. He said Reeves had paid him to monitor the house and alert if the man in the blue truck did anything suspicious. "Suspicious?" I repeated when they told me. "I'm the victim." The kid said Reeves told him I was running an illegal operation from my garage and that this was part of a community watch enforcement. Reeves had even shown him fake sheriff credentials. The boy had no clue it was all illegal. When they seized his phone, they found text chains between him and a number labeled Karen Supervisor, dated just 3 nights earlier. That was the breakthrough the sheriff needed. They issued warrants for Reeves and Karen both, though finding them proved difficult, until one morning when I stepped outside and saw a white van parked across the street with its rear doors slightly ajar. I couldn't see inside, but something about it felt wrong. The sheriff arrived minutes later after I called. They opened the van, and there she was, Karen herself, hiding inside, disheveled, muttering to herself while clutching a tablet streaming live footage of my home. "They won't stop," she said, rocking back and forth. "They're still inside your house." My blood ran cold. "Who?" I asked, but she didn't answer. The sheriff's deputies arrested her again, but this time she laughed as they cuffed her, eyes wild and glassy. "You'll see," she whispered to me. "You'll see it too." The tablet she held contained files labeled Phase 3 Interior Access. The sheriff looked at me. "We need to check your home right now." We searched every inch. Attic, basement, crawl space, garage, and that's when they found it. A micro camera wedged into the smoke detector in the hallway, its power line running through the attic toward a small transmitter hidden behind insulation. My heart stopped. That wasn't from before, this was new. Someone had been inside our house within the last few days, installing this thing under our noses. The sheriff said it looked professionally done, same equipment as Reeves's old jobs. They swept the entire property and uncovered 2 more, one behind the porch light and another inside a vent facing the living room. My wife broke down completely. We checked hotel listings that night, desperate to leave, but as I was packing, I noticed a small drone hovering just outside the bedroom window, hovering still like it was staring right at me. I lunged for the curtains and it darted upward, but not before I saw the tiny sticker on its side, a barcode with the initials NES07, Neighborhood Insight Security. Reeves again. The sheriff's office issued a manhunt, but Reeves was off-grid. He'd abandoned his registered address, liquidated his accounts, and disappeared. Karen, meanwhile, was sent to a psychiatric facility, but before leaving she told the deputies something that kept me awake for nights. She said Reeves had shown her proof that my house sat over a node, some kind of hidden signal hub she claimed transmitted surveillance frequencies. It sounded insane, but when the sheriff's techs inspected our property layout, they discovered an old underground cable line from the 1980s running beneath the driveway, unused but still carrying residual current, enough to mess with signal scanners. Reeves might have mistaken it for government hardware, and Karen's paranoia turned it into an obsession. "They thought you were part of a surveillance program," the sheriff told me. "They thought you were watching them first." I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. My family moved temporarily to a rental outside the county, leaving our old house under police watch. But one evening, the sheriff called me, voice grave. We found him. Reeves had been discovered in a warehouse 2 towns over, surrounded by broken drones and computer towers. He'd taken his own life, leaving behind a series of notes addressed to the neighborhood. In them, he claimed he and Karen had been monitoring frequencies of corruption and that I had triggered the alert. He even included schematics of my property, claiming the node beneath my driveway emitted unidentified transmissions. The sheriff said it was clear Reeves had been deep in some conspiracy delusion, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. We returned home weeks later after the house had been cleared and every device removed, thinking it was finally over. But when I stepped out onto the driveway that first night back, I noticed something faintly shimmering in the concrete, a reflection catching the porch light. I bent down slowly and saw it. Another screw head, freshly installed, tiny but unmistakable. My breath hitched, my pulse hammering. I pried it loose with trembling fingers, and beneath it, the wire ran deeper, newer, smoother than the first one I'd ever found. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number at that exact moment. It said only 3 words: "New system active." For a full minute I couldn't breathe, just staring at that message glowing on my screen. The words, "New system active," burning into my eyes like some coded threat from the dark. And when I finally tore my gaze away, I noticed that the air around me felt charged, humming faintly, like there was electricity crawling beneath the concrete itself, the same way it had the first time I dug up that cursed wire months ago, except this time it was stronger, newer, and definitely not coming from any utility line I knew of. My instincts screamed to get my family out, but something in me needed to know who was doing this, because Karen was locked away, Reeves was dead, and yet here I was again, standing on my own property, holding a freshly installed spy screw that shouldn't even exist. I ran to the garage, grabbed my shovel, and started digging right where the wire disappeared into the ground. The shovel striking something hard barely a foot down, a black plastic casing about the size of a lunchbox, sealed shut with electrical tape. I yanked it free, my heart hammering, and carried it to the porch light where I could see it better. It wasn't like the crude wiring I'd seen in Karen's setup. It was sleek, professional, even branded. The label read, "Verity Systems Surveillance Node, Model RX7, with a serial number and a small QR code sticker." I scanned it immediately, and the link took me to a restricted internal portal that demanded credentials. My hands shook as I backed out of it, because this wasn't some homemade voyeurism kit. This was industrial-level tech used by government contractors. I called the sheriff at once, and he arrived 20 minutes later, bringing a tech specialist from the State Bureau. When they examined the device, both of them exchanged the kind of look that makes your stomach sink. "This isn't on any consumer registry," the tech muttered. "Where did you say you found it?" I pointed to the hole. They took photos, bagged the node, and told me not to touch anything else. The sheriff told me quietly, "If this is what I think it is, you're part of something bigger than Karen's obsession." That line chilled me more than the cold air. The next day, my family stayed with relatives while investigators swept the property again. They found 3 more of those black boxes buried in a grid pattern across the driveway and side yard, each one linked by fresh wiring leading toward the main power conduit near the street. The sheriff looked at me like he didn't even know how to explain what was happening. "These were installed recently," he said, "within the last 72 hours. Which was impossible. Our property had been under 24-hour police watch since we moved back. Unless whoever did it had access to that surveillance schedule. That night, a different kind of visitor came. A pair of men in unmarked suits. Badges flashed so quickly I didn't catch the agency, but the sheriff let them through without a word. They questioned me for 2 hours straight about Reeves, about Karen, about any contact I'd had with contractors or tech companies. When I asked who they were, one of them just said, "We're following up on a classified investigation." The other added, "You may have stumbled onto equipment from a federal project that was stolen." My mind reeled. "Stolen?" He nodded. "And whoever's trying to retrieve it may not want witnesses." After they left, the sheriff confided in me that those men weren't from his department. "They didn't even sign in," he whispered. "I'm not sure they're who they claim to be." By morning, the black boxes were gone from the evidence locker. Just gone. The sheriff was furious, shouting over the phone to someone higher up. But all he got was silence and case reassignment. Then the calls started again. Unknown numbers. Sometimes a click and static, sometimes faint breathing, sometimes a distorted voice whispering my name. My wife begged me to change our numbers, so we did, but the calls kept coming to the new line within a day. The sheriff moved us into temporary witness protection, putting us in a cabin far out by the state forest, thinking the isolation might help. But isolation only made the fear grow. The first night there, I woke up to that same faint buzzing sound outside, the one that had haunted me for months. I looked out the window and saw a faint red light blinking through the trees. I went out with my flashlight and found a drone lodged in a pine branch, its rotors tangled, still operational, but stuck. I climbed up, retrieved it, and saw the logo again, NES, but someone had etched over it with a knife, carving 3 letters into the plastic, RX-7. I brought it inside and called the sheriff, but the line cut out twice, static roaring in my ear before the call dropped entirely. The power flickered next, and then the TV turned on by itself, displaying a grainy feed, my own driveway, live. I could see patrol cars parked outside our old house, one of them moving, headlights flickering. I unplugged the TV, heart racing, but even with the plug out, the screen stayed lit for 3 seconds longer, showing one last image, the same screw head zoomed in close, and the words "still watching" appearing across it like a digital glitch. My wife screamed. The sheriff arrived the next morning with state technicians to check for signal breaches. They told us the drone's transmitter was modified to act as a remote repeater, capable of hijacking nearby electronics. "Whoever built this knows advanced systems," one said. "This isn't Karen's handiwork." That night, while packing to relocate again, I got an email from an anonymous address, subject line, "You shouldn't have dug." Attached was a single image, me, taken from above, standing on my driveway holding the shovel the night before they took the black box. The timestamp read Euro 4302, precisely the time I was outside alone. My body went cold. The sheriff traced the email's origin, but said it bounced through multiple encrypted nodes worldwide. "They're masking everything," he said. A week later, the sheriff called to tell me something that made me drop the phone. Karen had been found dead in her facility. Cause of death listed as cardiac arrest. But the guard who discovered her said her room lights had flickered all night before it happened. And when they entered, the words, "Node closed," were scrawled on her mirror in marker. The sheriff came to see me personally after that. I think Reeves and Karen were manipulated, he said. Used as pawns. Someone wanted to test how far they could push surveillance tech in a real environment. He paused, eyes dark. And your house was their testing ground. That idea gnawed at me. Everything, every sleepless night, every noise, every lens, suddenly fit together like a sick experiment. The more I thought about it, the more I noticed things that didn't make sense. The way the power meter outside my home never matched the bill. The faint static in my phone calls even in the new location. The fact that the sheriff's own dash cam footage sometimes glitched when facing my property. It was like the entire area was under some invisible frequency net. I started researching Verity Systems RX-7, and every search led to dead links or wiped pages. One forum post I found before it vanished claimed the RX-7 nodes were prototypes for an urban behavioral monitoring array designed to read motion patterns and predict human activity. It sounded like conspiracy nonsense, until I remembered the activity labels on Karen's old recordings. 6 a.m. entry, 10 p.m. light off, predictive tracking. My wife wanted to destroy what was left of the equipment, but the sheriff begged me to hold off. The feds were supposedly reclaiming their property soon. But before they could, the black SUV came back. Same two suits, same blank expressions. They said they needed to secure all remaining assets for national security. They wouldn't show me identification this time, just a printed letter with half the text redacted. The sheriff tried to block them, but got overruled by a call from the state attorney. The men took everything, every wire, every device, every drone piece, and left me with a single warning. Do not discuss this with media or online. It's contained. But it wasn't contained. The next night, even with everything supposedly gone, the cameras on my phone started turning on by themselves. My smart doorbell, unplugged and boxed, lit up in the dark, recording nothing but the empty cabin floor. I tried smashing the devices, burning the boxes, but somehow the same footage appeared again on a new laptop the sheriff gave us for safety. It was as if the system itself had migrated. I sent him screenshots, and he said the IT guys found something embedded in my Wi-Fi router, a program calling itself RX-7 Supervisor. It wasn't installed. It was etched into the firmware. It's not supposed to be possible, he muttered. It's self-replicating. That was the night the lights outside went out one by one, until only the faint red glow of the power indicator remained, pulsing slowly, like a heartbeat. My wife grabbed my arm, whispering that she could hear something, a low humming beneath the floorboards, almost like distant machinery. When I pressed my ear to the floor, I heard it too, and my blood turned to ice. There shouldn't have been any wiring beneath that cabin. It was raised on stilts. I grabbed the flashlight and went outside, circling the structure. And sure enough, half buried beneath the soil near the foundation was another black box, freshly placed, wires snaking upward. I didn't even dig it out this time. I just backed away, shaking. The sheriff arrived 15 minutes later, saw it, and didn't speak for a long time. They're moving the system, he said quietly. Following you. I wanted to believe he meant the people behind it, but from the look on his face, I realized he meant the system itself, as if whatever RX-7 really was had gone autonomous. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. Our phones displayed timestamps a few minutes into the future. My truck's GPS plotted random coordinates at night. The motion lights flickered in a pattern. 2 short, 1 long, repeating endlessly. The sheriff's tech guy analyzed the pattern and paled. That's binary, he said. It spells watch. When the sheriff tried to file a federal escalation report, the system at the station froze completely. Every computer displaying the same words. Observation active. That's when the sheriff finally lost his composure. We're shutting this down, he said. We're burning the line. He gathered a team to dig up the old underground cable, the one Reeves and Karen believed was the node. They worked all night, cutting section after section until finally, near dawn, they reached a rusted junction box deep under the driveway. The moment they sliced through the last line, every light in the area flickered out. Street lamps, patrol cars, even the stars seemed to dim for a second. Then silence. Heavy, absolute. For the first time in months, I felt nothing watching me. The sheriff exhaled. It's done, he said. We all believed it. until the next morning, when I woke to another message on my phone from an unlisted number. System restored. Thank you for your cooperation. And beneath it was a live image feed, not from a camera, but from my own eyes, my exact perspective, as if the phone could somehow see what I saw. The message refreshed itself, and new text appeared. You are now part of the observation. As the investigation wrapped up, the sheriff and his team dismantled every last inch of wiring between Karen's garage and my property, stacking the tangled mess of cables on her driveway as evidence of her obsession. The footage she'd secretly captured was submitted to the court, and the judge didn't hold back. A restraining order, hefty fines, and a mandate for psychological evaluation. Karen stood trembling as the sheriff recited the charges. Her once arrogant smirk replaced by the hollow stare of someone watching their world crumble. The HOA board, desperate to save face, expelled her immediately, and I received a formal apology for the stressful inconvenience. But I wasn't interested in their apologies. I wanted accountability. A local news station picked up the story, airing footage of the camera being pulled out of my driveway and the wires leading back into Karen's garage. The headline read, HOA president caught spying on neighbor, illegal surveillance uncovered. Overnight, the community that once sided with her turned against her completely. Property values dipped, homeowners panicked, and the once pristine Oak Ridge Meadows HOA became a scandal-laden ghost of its former self. I didn't gloat publicly, but when I walked my driveway that evening, I noticed how peaceful it finally felt. No more watching eyes, no more hidden mics, just silence and freedom. A week later, Karen's house went up for sale, though no one dared to buy it, not after what she'd done. I replaced the patch of asphalt where her camera had been drilled in, sealed it clean, and set up my own legal security system, this time with a clear sign posted, Smile, you're on camera, legally. When I looked at the live feed on my phone, it wasn't paranoia anymore, it was closure. Months passed, and I finally began to enjoy mornings again. Coffee on the porch, birds on the fence, my wife smiling without the unease that had shadowed her for months. Then one afternoon, as I was mowing the lawn, a deputy truck pulled up quietly. The same sheriff stepped out, holding a small sealed envelope. Thought you'd want to see this, he said, handing it to me. Inside was a final report. Technical forensics showed Karen had been accessing not just live feeds, but also my Wi-Fi router through a custom bridge device hidden near the fence. She had a full setup, he said, shaking his head. It wasn't curiosity, it was control. That night, I burned that printed report in the fire pit, letting the flames erase every trace of her intrusion. Sometimes justice doesn't just mean punishment, it means peace. And as I looked out over the driveway she once violated, I couldn't help but smile, knowing I had reclaimed not only my home, but my sense of safety. The neighborhood was quiet now, the HOA humbled, the cameras gone. Karen's garage stood empty, her power dissolved, her name whispered only as a warning. Don't cross the wrong neighbor.